I never had a wife. The mountain man who risked everything to protect a widow's children. Jack McAllister, known to everyone in the distant valleys as the Mountain Man, lived alone in the rugged peaks that overlooked the small town of Pine Hollow.
He was a large man, strong and sturdy from years of living off the land. His hands were rough from chopping wood, setting traps, and climbing rocky cliffs. His hair was streaked with gray, though his eyes were sharp, always watching the world with careful attention. Jack had never married. He had never known the warmth of a wife or the laughter of children filling his home. Some people thought he was strange or unfriendly, but the truth was simpler. Jack had chosen a life of solitude. The mountains were his home, and in them he felt safe. His cabin was built from the trees he had felled himself, strong and solid, with a roof of thick pine branches layered to keep out the snow. A small stream ran nearby, giving him fresh water, and he had a vegetable patch he tended carefully. Jack's life was quiet and predictable. Every morning he would wake before sunrise, feed the animals he kept, check his traps and prepare for the day. Some nights he would sit outside watching the stars flicker over the peaks, listening to the wind whistle through the trees. It was a peaceful life, though it was lonely. One crisp autumn morning, as Jack returned from checking a trap near a ridge, he noticed smoke curling up from a valley he had rarely explored. At first he thought it might be from a campfire, but the smoke was too steady, too thick. His curiosity, along with a quiet concern, drew him closer. From a distance he saw a small cabin nestled between two hills. The wood looked new but poorly stacked, gray. Around it he could see a woman, struggling to gather firewood. Beside her, two children, a boy and a girl, were trying to help, but they were clearly too small to manage the heavy logs. Jack hesitated. He usually avoided other people. Interacting with strangers had never been easy for him. But something about the scene struck a chord. The woman's movements were tired and careful. Her shoulders slumped as though she carried the weight of the world on them. The children looked hungry and cold. Jack had seen hardship before in the mountains, but this was different. This was a family struggling alone, and they were in danger if winter came early. He made his way down the slope, careful to remain hidden at first. He watched for a while, noticing how the boy tripped over a rock and fell, scraping his knee, and how the girl's small hands were red and raw from carrying sticks. The woman knelt beside the boy, checking the scrape, her voice soft but tinged with worry. Jack felt a strange pull in his chest. He had never been responsible for anyone but himself, and yet something inside him told him that he could not simply walk away. Finally, Jack stepped into view. At first, the woman startled, her eyes wide as she clutched her children. Jack raised his hand slightly in a gesture meant to show he meant no harm. "Easy," he said in a deep, calm voice. "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman, Mary Thompson, straightened, her expression cautious but not hostile. Who are you?" she asked, keeping her children close. "Jack McAllister," he replied. "I live up in the mountains." He paused, then added softly, "Looks like you could use some help." Mary's eyes flickered between him and her children. She hesitated, unsure if this stranger was trustworthy. But she was tired and the truth was clear. She could not manage everything alone. Finally she nodded. "If you don't mind," she said cautiously. "We could use some help." Jack nodded, and with that he stepped forward, began carrying some of the heavier logs to the cabin, stacking them neatly by the wall. The children watched him in awe, not used to seeing anyone so strong and capable. Jack worked silently, letting his actions speak for him. There was no need for words. The work itself was proof that he cared. Over the next few days, Jack returned regularly. He'd brought extra firewood, checked the small garden to make sure the crops were safe, and showed the children how to handle small tasks safely. Mary observed quietly, her skepticism slowly giving way to relief. She had been alone since her husband died suddenly the previous spring, leaving her with no experience and little support. Breaths. Jack's help was practical and quiet, and that suited her. One afternoon, Jack sat by the cabin whittling a piece of wood into a small toy for the children. The boy watched him carefully, then asked, "Why do you live alone in the mountains?" Jack shrugged, his eyes distant. "It's quiet up there."
I like it. The girl looked curious. Ha ha.
"Don't you get lonely?" Jack's lips pressed into a thin line. He had never had a reason to answer that question honestly. "Sometimes," he admitted finally, "but I get by." The children nodded, as if they understood something about life he could not explain. For Jack, their innocence and curiosity were a balm he hadn't realized he needed. He began to look forward to these small visits, to the sound of children's laughter and Mary's soft voice. Winter was approaching quickly. The first snow fell, light at first, then heavy, coating the valley in white. Jack saw the worry on Mary's face as she struggled to keep the fire going and make sure the children stayed warm. Without hesitation, he carried larger bundles of firewood up the hill, braving icy paths and deep snow. He repaired holes in the roof, patched cracks in the walls, and ensured that the cabin could withstand the cold. One night as the wind howled outside, Jack sat by the fireplace while Mary tucked the children into bed. He watched quietly as she smoothed the boy's hair, kissed his forehead, and whispered softly to the girl. Jack felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a mixture of admiration and longing. He realized that for the first time in his life he cared deeply about people other than himself. Mary looked up and noticed him sitting by the fire. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what we would have done without you," Jack nodded, looking into the flames. "Just doing what's right," he said. But inside, he felt something more. Something he had never allowed himself to admit, that he wanted to be part of their lives. As days turned into weeks, Jack continued to help the family, brought in fresh vegetables, and repaired the children's small sled so they could play in the snow safely. Mary began to trust him, slowly letting him share the responsibility of caring for her children. And the children, once wary of strangers, now ran to him, calling him their mountain uncle. Despite his rough exterior, Jack had a gentle side he rarely showed. He told stories by the fire, showing the children how to identify animal tracks, how to whistle in the mountains, and even how to make simple toys from scraps of wood. They laughed, learned, and felt safe with him. And Jack, who had never had a family, discovered that he could love in ways he had never imagined. But even as he grew close to them, Jack remained careful. He did not speak of love or marriage, for he had never experienced it. He focused on protecting them, teaching them, and providing what he could. He knew that one day something might threaten this fragile peace, and he wanted to be ready. One evening after a long day of work and play, Jack stood outside, looking down at the valley. The sun set behind the peaks, casting long shadows over the cabin, where Mary and the children slept. For the first time in his life, Jack felt that he had a reason to care, a purpose beyond his own survival. He whispered to himself, "I've never had a wife, but maybe I can have a family in another way." That night, the wind carried a soft promise through the mountains. Jack understood that the life he had always lived, alone, might be changing. And though he did not know what the future held, he was ready to face it, whatever it might bring, for the woman and the children who had slowly become his world.
Winter had arrived in the mountains, covering the world in a thick blanket of snow.
The trees were heavy with frost, and the streams ran slower under sheets of ice. For most people, this season meant staying indoors, keeping warm by the fire. But for Jack McAllister, the mountain man, winter was a test of survival. And now, with Mary Thompson and her children in his care, it became a test of courage, patience, and trust. The first heavy snowfall had come suddenly. Jack woke before sunrise, as he always did, to check the animals and make sure the paths to the cabin were safe. The valley was silent except for the occasional creak of ice-laden branches and the distant call of a hawk. Jack tightened his coat, pulled on his gloves, and set out with a heavy sled full of firewood for Mary's cabin. The boy and girl ran alongside him at first, laughing as they slipped in the snow, but Jack soon told them to stay close to the cabin while he delivered the wood. Mary had been struggling to keep the fire going. The first nights of heavy snow had been cold and frightening for the children. Jack arrived just in time, setting down the firewood with a grunt and checking the chimney for any blockages. Mary watched him work, a quiet appreciation in her eyes.
"Thank you, Jack," she said softly. "We couldn't manage without you."
Jack nodded, brushing the snow from his coat. "You're doing well. The children are strong, and you're keeping the cabin in good shape."
"I'm just helping a little." The children, bundled in scarves and mittens, watched Jack with admiration.
They had begun to see him as more than just a helper. To them, he was brave, strong, and kind. They followed him around the cabin, asking questions about the mountains, the animals, and the snow. Jack answered patiently, showing them how to identify animal tracks in the snow and teaching them how to whistle to call birds safely. As days passed, Jack became a constant presence in their lives. He brought fresh food, checked the garden, and repaired the cabin whenever winter storms damaged the roof or walls. But it was more than just practical help. Jack began teaching the children small survival skills, things Mary could not manage alone. He showed them how to safely chop wood, how to set small traps for rabbits, and how to gather berries without getting lost. The children were quick learners. The boy, who was energetic but clumsy, learned to carry logs without tripping. The girl, quiet and observant, learned to recognize footprints in the snow. Jack was patient, never raising his voice. Even when mistakes happened, he would gently correct them and demonstrate the proper way to do things. The children began to trust him deeply, not just as a teacher, but as someone who cared for them. Mary, too, began to trust him. At first, she had been cautious, fearing that relying on Jack might bring trouble or disappointment. But she saw how consistent he was, how he worked tirelessly to keep her children safe, and how he never expected anything in return. Slowly, she began to allow him into her life. She asked him to help with heavier chores, to repair the cabin walls, and even to help with the children's education, teaching them basic reading and writing alongside survival skills. One particularly harsh evening, a fierce blizzard hit the valley. Snow fell in thick sheets and the wind howled like a wild animal. The cabin was small and simple, and the snow piled high against the walls. Mary struggled to keep the fire burning, her hands numb from the cold, while the children huddled close together, shivering. Jack arrived with a sled full of firewood, his face covered in snow, his coat frozen at the edges. Without a word, he began stacking the firewood, checking the cabin walls for leaks, and repairing broken window shutters. Mary watched in awe, realizing how much she depended on him. The children stared at Jack, amazed at his strength and calmness in the face of the storm. That night they sat close to the fire, listening to Jack's quiet voice telling stories of the mountains, of animals surviving harsh winters, and of his life in solitude. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, Jack remained by the cabin, bringing food, checking on the children, and keeping the fire burning. Mary saw how devoted he was, and slowly, her respect turned into quiet admiration. She began to notice the way he looked out for her children, the way he spoke softly to them, and the care in his actions.
She realized that Jack was not just a helper. He was someone who could become the protector her family needed.
One morning, after the storm had passed, Jack decided to teach the children a more advanced survival skill, navigating the mountains safely in winter. He took them to a nearby ridge, showing them how to read the terrain, how to avoid weak ice, and how to recognize landmarks. The children were nervous at first, but Jack's calm demeanor reassured them. "Remember," Jack said, pointing to the snow-covered valley below, "the mountains can be beautiful, but they are also dangerous. You always have to pay attention, stay aware, and help each other." The children nodded seriously, absorbing his words. They began to see Jack not only as a teacher, but as someone they could rely on in any situation. The bond between them grew stronger every day. Mary watched from a distance, her heart warming. She realized that Jack was becoming part of their lives in a way she had never expected. Rasp. She could see the affection the children felt for him, and how he quietly protected them. She began to allow herself to rely on him more, asking for his help with chores, trusting his judgment, and even sharing small details of her own past, including her husband's death and her fears for the future. One evening, as Jack helped the children build a small snow shelter, Mary came outside to bring them hot drinks. She watched silently as Jack carefully guided the children, showing them how to pack the snow to make the shelter strong. The children laughed and worked together following Jack's instructions. "You're very patient," Mary said quietly as she handed him a cup of hot cocoa. Jack shrugged, his cheeks pink from the cold. "Patience comes from necessity," he said with a small smile. "And from caring about who you're helping." Mary looked at him, noticing for the first time the quiet strength in his eyes, the kindness that he rarely spoke about. She felt a flutter of something unfamiliar, a warmth that made her chest tighten. She quickly looked away, pretending to check the children's work. As winter deepened, Jack continued to help the family in every way he could. He hunted for food when the snow made it difficult for Mary to find supplies, mended their clothes when they wore out, and even built a small sled for the children to play safely in the snow.
Each act of kindness brought them closer, though no one spoke openly about feelings.
There was a quiet understanding, a bond formed through shared struggles and trust. One evening after the children had gone to bed, Mary sat by the fire with Jack. She hesitated, unsure if she should speak. Finally, she said, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done."
"I've never had anyone like you in my life." Jack looked into the flames, his expression unreadable.
"You don't have to thank me," he said. "I just want to make sure you and the children are safe." Mary nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Bah, it's more than that. You've given us hope. You've given us safety. And you've given the children someone to trust." Jack remained quiet, but inside he felt a deep satisfaction. For the first time he realized that his life of solitude, his years alone in the mountains, had led him to this moment. He had never had a family, never known the warmth of a home filled with love, but now in this small cabin with Mary and the children, he could feel that something precious was beginning. The children, meanwhile, were thriving under his guidance. They learned quickly, their confidence growing every day. The boy became more careful and skilled, the girl more confident and observant. They looked up to Jack not only as a protector, but as someone who taught them important lessons about life, courage, and kindness. Jack, for his part, began to feel emotions he had long buried. He found himself caring deeply for Mary, though he did not know how to express it. He found joy in the children's laughter, pride in their accomplishments, and a sense of purpose he had never felt before. One night, as he looked out over the snow-covered valley, Jack whispered to himself, "I've never had a wife, and I've never had a family, but maybe this is what it means to belong." The winter was long, but with Jack's help, Mary and the children survived it safely and learned to thrive even in the harshest conditions. Trust and affection grew quietly, steadily, and the bonds that would define their lives were beginning to form. And though no one spoke openly about love, each of them knew, in their own way, that their lives had changed forever.
Jack had come into their lives quietly, with no promises and no expectations.
But in the heart of the mountains, in the middle of snow and silence, he had begun to build something that neither he nor Mary had thought possible. A family. The mountains were silent that morning, but the stillness carried a tension that only Jack could feel. Burrs. Snow lay deep across the valley, and the frost made the air sharp and cold. Jack had noticed signs over the past few days. Broken branches, footprints that did not belong to the animals, and glimpses of movement far down the slope. Someone had been watching the cabin. His instincts told him that danger was coming. Mary was busy inside the cabin, preparing breakfast for the children, while they laughed and played with the small sled Jack had built. She had begun to trust him completely, relying on his judgment and guidance. But she did not know about the danger lurking outside. Not yet. Jack watched them through the frost-covered window, feeling a tightness in his chest. He knew he had to act carefully. The previous winter storms had taught him that survival in the mountains depended on awareness and preparation. Jack began to plan. He checked the traps he had set around the cabin, making sure they were ready to signal if anyone approached. Best. He hid extra supplies in the woods and built a small path to a concealed lookout point on a nearby hill. He could see the entire valley from there and would be able to spot intruders long before they reached the cabin. Breath passed quietly, but Jack's attention never wavered. He taught the children how to stay safe if they were outside alone, how to hide from danger, and how to call for help without panicking. The mountains are beautiful, he told them one afternoon. But they can be dangerous. But you have to respect them, and you have to help each other. The children listened intently, absorbing every word. They had grown stronger and smarter under Jack's guidance. They laughed and played, but they were also learning lessons that would keep them alive. Barry noticed how confident they had become, and could not help but admire the quiet way Jack had shaped their lives. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Jack climbed to his lookout point. He scanned the valley carefully, his eyes narrowing at a small movement near the tree line. There, hidden among the trees, were 3 men. Their movements were cautious, and they carried tools that made Jack's stomach tighten with concern. They were not townsfolk. They were strangers with ill intentions. Jack returned to the cabin quietly. He found Mary putting the children to bed. "There's a danger nearby," he said softly, keeping his voice calm. "We need to be careful." Mary's eyes widened. "What kind of danger?" "I don't know yet," Jack replied. "But stay inside tonight! Don't go near the door or the windows." "I'll take care of it." Mary hesitated but nodded. She had seen Jack's courage and skill before. She trusted him. And now, more than ever, she needed to. The children, sensing tension in the air, huddled together, looking to Jack for reassurance. He smiled faintly, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "Everything will be fine," he said, though inside his mind raced with plans. The night fell, deep and dark, and the snow began to fall lightly again. Jack moved silently outside, using the shadows in the snow to his advantage. He watched the strangers from a distance, studying their movements. They were searching, looking for something, or someone. He realized they had heard of the cabin, perhaps thinking it held valuables, or that it was unprotected. Jack's mind worked quickly. Right. He could not confront them carelessly. They were armed and dangerous. He decided to create traps and diversions. He moved silently through the snow, setting small warning signals on the paths leading to the cabin. He adjusted his traps to ensure that any intruder would make noise if they came too close. He then returned to his lookout, ready to act if they approached. The hours passed slowly. Brace.
Inside the cabin, Mary tried to keep the children calm. "It's just the wind," she said, though her voice trembled slightly.
The children, sensing the tension, stayed close to her. They did not fully understand what was happening, but they trusted Jack completely. Breath.
Suddenly, a loud snap echoed from the woods. One of the strangers had triggered a trap.
Jack watched as the man fell to the ground, groaning. The other two men paused, alarmed. Jack knew this was his chance. Using the shadows, he moved closer, positioning himself between the intruders and the cabin. He confronted them with calm authority. "Leave now!" he called in a deep voice that carried through the valley. "You're not welcome here." The men hesitated, clearly surprised by the sudden appearance of this large, rugged man. One of them raised a hand holding a small knife. Jack did not flinch. He had faced worse dangers alone in the mountains. With precise movements, he used the snow and the terrain to his advantage, forcing the men back.
He was not reckless. He knew that protecting Mary and the children meant being smart, not just strong.
The strangers tried to advance, but Jack's traps, knowledge of the terrain, and calm determination kept them at bay. Eventually, the men realized they could not succeed. They retreated into the forest, leaving the cabin and its occupants safe. Jack watched until they disappeared completely, making sure they would not return that night. Returning to the cabin, he found Mary waiting anxiously at the door. "They're gone," he said, though his face remained serious. "You and the children are safe." Mary's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly, gratitude and relief pouring out of her. "I don't know what we would have done without you," she whispered. Jack nodded, his strong arms holding her gently. Inside, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had always lived alone, had never married, and had never had a family. But in this moment he realized that he would do anything to protect these people who had become his world. The children, hearing the voices, came to the door. They were sleepy, but curious. Jack knelt down to their level. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe. Go back to bed." The next morning, the valley was quiet again. The snow glistened in the sunlight, and the danger seemed to have passed. Jack went about his usual work, checking traps and ensuring the cabin was secure. Mary worked alongside him, carrying wood and tending to the children. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a trust that had been forged in the fire of danger. Over the next few days, Jack continued to teach the children, preparing them for life in the mountains and ensuring they knew how to protect themselves. The children grew more confident, moving through the snow with ease, helping Mary with chores, and learning to be brave without fear. Mary, too, grew stronger. She had faced the fear of losing her children and had seen the courage of Jack firsthand. She began to rely on him not just for physical protection, but for guidance and support. Peace. She realized that Jack had become an essential part of their lives, someone who could be trusted completely. One evening, after the children were asleep, Mary sat by the fire with Jack. "I don't think I've ever met anyone like you," she said quietly. "You risked your life for us without hesitation." Breaths. I don't know how to thank you." Jack looked into the fire, his expression calm but thoughtful. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said, Bration. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. You and the children needed someone to protect you, and I could do that." Mary nodded, understanding the depth of his words. She had seen courage and kindness in Jack, but she also realized that there was more, an unspoken bond that had formed between them. They did not speak of love yet, but the connection was there, growing quietly, steadily, like the snow melting into the streams. The winter continued, harsh and demanding, but Jack's presence brought stability and safety to the cabin. The children thrived, Mary gained confidence, and Jack discovered emotions he had long buried. He had never known love, never had a family, but he felt a sense of purpose that he had never imagined possible.
As the days passed, Jack also began to teach the children how to think critically, to make decisions, and to remain calm under pressure.
"The mountains can teach you many things," he said one morning, "but the most important lesson is to stay alert and help those who need it. You never know when you'll face danger."
The children listened, wide-eyed and attentive. They had seen Jack face danger, and now they were learning from him.
They laughed, played, and learned, all under the watchful eye of the mountain man who had become their protector. Jack often found himself reflecting on his life. He had lived alone for many years, never imagining that he would care for anyone else so deeply. But now, with Mary and the children, he felt a sense of belonging he had never known. He realized that family was not just about blood. It was about care, trust, and being there for each other when it mattered most. One night, as he looked out over the snow-covered valley, Jack whispered to himself, "I've never had a wife, but maybe this is what it means to have a family."
In the mountains, where danger and beauty existed side by side, Jack had found his purpose. He had faced real threats and had protected those who depended on him.
And though the future remained uncertain, he knew one thing for sure. He would do everything in his power to keep Mary and her children safe, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Spring slowly arrived in the mountains, melting the snow and bringing new life to the valley. Streams that had been frozen during the harsh winter gushed with clear, rushing water. The air was warmer, and the sun shone brighter, casting a golden glow over the trees. Jack McAllister looked out over the valley from his cabin, his eyes scanning the familiar peaks. The mountains were quiet now, peaceful after the stormy winter. And Jack allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Mary Thompson and her children were thriving. The boy ran through the fresh grass, laughing as he chased after a rabbit, while the girl helped Mary in the small garden they had begun planting for the spring. Jack had built raised beds for vegetables, reinforced the cabin, and repaired the small bridge over the stream. Life had returned to a kind of calm, and for the first time in many months, Jack felt that their little family could breathe without constant fear. But calm did not mean idle. Jack still patrolled the valley, checking for signs of danger, ensuring the paths were safe and tending to his traps. His skills had saved the family during the winter, and he knew that safety depended on vigilance. Mary trusted him completely now, and the children's affection for him had grown into a bond that went beyond gratitude. One morning, Jack noticed fresh footprints near the edge of the woods. They were not animal tracks, and they were too careful to be casual hikers. His instincts told him someone had come close, perhaps curious about the cabin. But he did not panic. Instead, he quietly prepared, checking the cabin's defenses, hiding supplies, and readying himself to intervene if necessary. Mary noticed his careful movements and came to his side. "Jack, is something wrong?" she asked gently. Jack shook his head. "No immediate danger, just being careful. The mountains can be unpredictable, and I want to make sure we stay safe." Mary smiled softly. "I trust you," she said, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, comforting, and Jack felt a small, unfamiliar flutter in his chest. It was the first time he had felt the weight of another person's affection for him, not in words, but in action, in trust, and in care. Days went by without incident, but Jack spent time teaching the children new skills. how to fish in the stream, how to identify edible plants, and how to move safely through the forest. The children were eager learners, and Jack found joy in watching them grow. He realized that the lessons he was teaching them were about more than survival. They were about courage, confidence, and kindness. Mary, too, began to let herself rely on Jack in ways she had never imagined. She would ask for his help with the heavier chores, seek his opinion on decisions about the garden or cabin repairs, and sometimes just sit by the fire with him, sharing stories and laughter. There was a quiet companionship between them, an unspoken understanding that grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, Jack and Mary were outside working together to reinforce the cabin's porch. The children played nearby, chasing each other and laughing. A sudden gust of wind blew, causing a loose plank to tip dangerously near the edge. Jack reacted instantly, catching it before it fell and ensuring the children were safe. Mary watched him carefully, her admiration and trust deepening. She realized that Jack's care for them was not just about physical protection. It was about presence, attention, and love that had no words but was clear in every action. That evening, as the children slept, Mary and Jack sat by the fire.
"I never thought I'd see a man like you," Mary said softly. "Strong, quiet, brave, and yet so gentle with them." Jack looked into the flames.
Breaths. "I never had a wife," he said quietly. "Never."
"Never thought I would." Mary reached out and placed a hand on his.
"Maybe you have now," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes shone with emotion. Jack felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he had never allowed himself to experience before. He realized that family was not just about birth or marriage, it was about care, trust, and shared life. And now, in this cabin, with Mary and the children, he had found it.
The following weeks were filled with small, meaningful moments.
Jack taught the children how to build small shelters, how to collect clean water from the stream, and how to care for the animals they had in their little yard.
Mary joined in, learning from Jack and helping guide the children.
They laughed together, shared meals, and even sang quietly by the fire at night. Each day, the bond between them deepened.
One day, while Jack was gathering firewood in the forest, he found evidence that the strangers who had threatened the cabin in winter were gone for good. He felt a relief he had not realized he needed.
For months he had feared a return of danger, but now he could allow himself to relax, knowing that his family could live safely.
That evening, he returned to the cabin to find Mary and the children preparing dinner.
The smell of fresh bread and roasted vegetables filled the air. The children ran to him, hugging his legs and laughing. Mary smiled at him from across the room, and Jack felt a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. As night fell, the family sat together by the fire. Jack told stories of the mountains, of animals he had seen, and of the lessons he had learned in solitude. The children listened, eyes wide, hanging on every word. Mary listened too, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and admiration for the man who had become the center of their world. The days turned into weeks, and the family grew stronger together. Jack found joy in the children's laughter, in Mary's quiet smiles, and in the simple routines of life in the mountains. Discovered a love that was not rushed, not loud, but steady and deep, rooted in care and trust.
He realized that this was the family he had never thought he would have.
Breast help her plant a new garden.
The children helped too, digging small holes and placing seeds carefully.
Jack showed them how to space the seeds, water them properly, and care for the young plants. As they worked together, the sun shone warmly, and the valley seemed brighter than it had ever been. Brief. Jack paused for a moment, looking at Mary and the children. "I never thought I would have this," he said softly. "A family, a home, people who need me. Mary smiled, her eyes shining. We need you, Jack.
And not just for help. We need you because you care.
Because you're here. Jack felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so many years alone, so many years thinking that his life was complete without anyone else. But now he understood that love and family were not about possession or marriage. They were about being present, being loyal, and being willing to put others before yourself.
That evening, the children fell asleep quickly, tired from their work in the garden and their play in the sunshine. Mary sat by the fire with Jack, their hands brushing occasionally.
The warmth of the fire mirrored the warmth growing in Jack's heart. He realized that he had found a home, not just a cabin, but a life filled with trust, laughter, and love. Spring deepened, and the valley became vibrant with color. Breaths. Flowers bloomed, the garden thrived, and the air was filled with the sound of birds returning from their winter migrations. Jack continued to protect and guide the family, but now he also allowed himself to relax and enjoy the small joys of life, the children's laughter, Mary's quiet companionship, and the simple beauty of the mountains he loved. One morning, as Jack and Mary walked along the stream with the children, he looked around at the valley. The snow had melted completely, the trees were green, and the cabin stood strong and safe. The children ran ahead, laughing and playing, while Mary held Jack's hand. He felt a deep sense of peace.
I've never had a wife, he said softly, almost to himself. Mary smiled and squeezed his hand.
You never needed one, she said, because you have us now. Jack looked down at the children, then back at Mary. His heart swelled with a quiet happiness. He realized that family was not about the past he had missed. It was about the present he had earned. It was about love, trust, and the shared moments that made life meaningful. That evening, Jack sat outside his cabin watching the sun set over the mountains. The children played nearby, Mary worked in the garden, and the valley was alive with color and life. Jack whispered to himself, I've never had a wife, but I have a family now. And this is more than I could have ever imagined. Brace. The mountains were no longer just a home of solitude. They had become a home of love, of protection, and of belonging. Jack McAllister had faced danger, hardship, and fear, and in doing so he had found something precious, a family that depended on him, trusted him, and loved him in return. In the quiet of the mountains, where the wind whispered through the trees and the streams sang their gentle songs, Jack understood that life was not about living alone. It was about caring, protecting, and sharing life with those who mattered most. And now, for the first time, he had done all of that, and found joy, peace, and love in the process. Jack had never had a wife, Desperry. He had never imagined a family of his own. But in Mary and her children he had found something far greater, a home, a purpose, and a love that would stay with him for the rest of his days. And in the mountains, under the endless sky, Jack finally felt complete.